The crystal glass trembled in Alara's hand as her rival's laugh, sharp and cruel as shattered ice, cut through the Gala's polite murmur. "Tears, darling, how utterly pedestrian," Serafina whispered, her voice a venom-laced caress. "William needs a diamond, not a wilting flower." Alara stood there, a ghost in a borrowed dress, her world collapsing in the most public way imaginable. She was just a simple artist, the forgotten wife. But what Serafina and her cheating husband didn't know was that the blood running through Alara's veins was older than the city's foundations and far more valuable than their fleeting ambition. They were about to learn that mocking a Blackwood was a mistake that couldn't be undone. The first sign of the affair wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a misplaced hotel receipt. It was silent. It was the way William Vance, her husband of 5 years, had started looking through her, his eyes focused on a horizon she was no longer a part of. He would come home late from Vance Innovations, his tech startup, smelling of a perfume she didn't own, a sharp, aggressive scent of sandalwood and night-blooming jasmine that was nothing like her own soft vanilla and lavender essence. Alara had tried to ignore it. She told herself it was the stress. William was staking everything on the upcoming Starlight Foundation Gala. It was his grand stage, his one shot to court the investors needed to keep his company from imploding. He had told her with a strained smile that their entire future rested on that one night. He needed her there on his arm, the perfect supportive wife. "Just for a few hours, Ellie," he'd pleaded. "Smile, look pretty, and let me handle the rest." She had agreed, as she always did. Alara was an artist, a watercolorist, whose soul found expression in gentle hues and delicate landscapes. She saw the world in shades of grey, not in the stark black and white of betrayal. She had willingly stepped back from her own prodigious talent, subsuming her identity to become Mrs. Vance. She managed their modest brownstone in Brooklyn, cultivated a rooftop garden that was her private sanctuary, and provided the quiet, stable foundation upon which William built his frantic ambitions. Her own family, the Blackwoods, had been skeptical of the marriage. "He doesn't see you, Alara." Her older brother Marcus had warned, his voice low and firm, like the granite of his boardroom table. "He sees a comfortable idea." Her father, Alistair, a man whose name was whispered with reverence in circles of old money and silent power, had simply looked at her with knowing eyes. "Remember who you are," he had said, "even when you let someone else name you." She had dismissed their concerns as the overprotectiveness of a family that couldn't understand her desire for a simple, normal life. She had wanted love, not a legacy. She had chosen William because he didn't know she was a Blackwood. To him, she was Alara May, an orphan with a small trust fund and a talent for painting. It was a lie of omission. She had cultivated a secret garden where she could be loved for herself alone. Now the walls of that garden were crumbling. The day of the gala, the lie became unbearable. While picking up William's suit from the dry cleaner, a small velvet box fell from his coat pocket. It wasn't the cheap ring box of a trinket. It was from Cartier. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it. Inside, nestled on black silk, was a diamond necklace, a cascade of fire and ice, so brilliant it hurt to look at. It was not for her. Her birthday had passed 2 months ago. Their anniversary was in the spring. This was a gift for someone else. That evening, as she fastened the simple pearl earrings her mother had left her, she saw the confirmation on William's phone left carelessly on the dresser, a text from a Serafina. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll be wearing your gift. Let's show them all what power looks like. J&S, forever. The breath left her body in a ragged, silent scream. The room tilted. J&S, William and Seraphina. It was real. The perfume, the late nights, the hollow space in their bed, it all crashed down on her. He wasn't just cheating. He was building a new life, a new couple right under her nose. And tonight, he was going to parade her, his clueless wife, into the same room as his mistress. The humiliation was a deliberate, calculated cruelty. "Ellie, are you ready?" William called from downstairs, his voice full of false cheer. She looked at her reflection. A pale woman with wide, haunted eyes stared back. The borrowed dress, a simple navy silk gown, felt like a costume. For a moment, she thought of shattering the mirror, of running away, of calling her father, and letting the Blackwood Empire obliterate this small, pathetic man. But a different kind of resolve settled in her chest, cold and hard as a river stone. No, she would not run. She would go to the gala. She would wear the name Vance one last time and watch him perform his final act. She would see with her own eyes the woman for whom he had traded her soul. The Starlight Foundation. Gala was held at Cipriani on Wall Street, a cathedral of capitalism, whose soaring marble columns and impossibly high frescoed ceilings were designed to make mortals feel small. The air thrummed with the low buzz of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of crystal and the scent of money, an intoxicating perfume of ambition and expensive cologne. Elara felt William's hand on the small of her back, a proprietary gesture that now felt like a brand. He guided her through the throng, his face plastered with a charming, confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was a master performer. "Darling, there's Arthur Harrison from the Harrison Group. I need 5 minutes with him. Just look lovely, won't you?" He squeezed her arm, a gesture of command disguised as affection, before abandoning her near a towering floral arrangement. Left alone, Elara became invisible. She was an oil and water mixture in this sea of champagne. Women in haute couture gowns dripping with diamonds appraised her simple dress with dismissive glances. Men in bespoke tuxedos looked past her, their eyes scanning for bigger players, more important connections. She was an accessory, and her owner had just set her down. And then she saw her. Seraphina Dubois was not a woman who entered a room. She conquered it. She was a vision in crimson, a bespoke Alexander McQueen gown that seemed molded to her statuesque frame. Her hair was a sleek black sheet, and around her neck, blazing like a constellation of captured stars, was the Cartier necklace. It was a declaration of war, worn as jewelry. She wasn't alone. She was flanked by a coterie of admirers, laughing at something she'd said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. William, who had just finished his conversation with Mr. Harrison, was drawn to her, like a moth to a raging fire. Elara watched a cold, clinical detachment settling over her as her husband approached this other woman. He didn't touch her, not yet, but the way he looked at her was an intimacy more profound than any kiss. He leaned in, whispering something in her ear, and Seraphina's responding laugh was throaty and triumphant. They were a tableau of power, beauty, and betrayal, and everyone was watching. Whispers followed in their wake. "That's William Vance. His startup is the next big thing. And that's Seraphina Dubois. Her father owns half of the media outlets in the city." Elara hadn't known that. William hadn't just found a mistress. He had found an upgrade, a strategic alliance. Elara felt a familiar sting behind her eyes and quickly retreated toward the shadowed terrace, desperate for air that wasn't thick with hypocrisy. The cool night air hit her face, but it couldn't cool the burning shame in her gut. She had been so naive. She had believed in their quiet life, in the promises he'd made, in their small Brooklyn kitchen. It had all been a lie. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a placeholder until a better offer came along. A single tear escaped and traced a cold path down her cheek. She hastily wiped it away, but it was too late. A shadow fell over her. Well, well, look what we have here. Serafina stood at the entrance to the terrace, a flute of champagne in her hand, the diamonds at her throat seeming to mock Elara's lone pearl earrings. The triumphant smile on her face was predatory, hiding out here all alone. Don't you know the help is supposed to use the back entrance? Serafina's eyes raked over Elara's simple dress, her lack of jewelry, her tear-streaked face. The disdain was palpable. Elara stood frozen, her voice caught in her throat. This was the woman who wore her husband's affection like a trophy. Let me give you a piece of advice, Serafina continued, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. Men like William, they don't want a watercolor. They want an oil painting. Bold, expensive, and something they can show off. You're beige. A lovely, comforting, forgettable shade of beige. She took a delicate sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving Elara's. He's going to be a titan of industry. He needs a titaness by his side. Not a... What is it you do, dabble with paints in a dusty little apartment? Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking at the very core of Elara's insecurities. Elara had made herself small for William, and now this woman was mocking her for it. The tears she had been fighting so hard to suppress began to well up, blurring the glittering lights of the city skyline behind Serafina's silhouette. She hated herself for her weakness, for letting this woman see her cry. Tears, darling. Serafina's laugh was the final devastating blow. How utterly pedestrian. You should really go home. This is a party for winners. You're just reminding everyone of his humble beginnings. With a final dismissive flick of her wrist, Serafina turned and walked back into the warmth and light of the gala, leaving Elara alone in the cold, her quiet world not just cracked, but utterly and completely shattered. For a long moment, Elara simply stood there, the cold marble of the balustrade seeping into her palms. Serafina's words echoed in the silence, each syllable a fresh wound. Beige, forgettable, humble beginnings. She wasn't just a cheated-on wife. In their eyes, she was an anchor, a liability William was about to cut loose. The tears flowed freely, now hot tracks of humiliation on her frozen cheeks. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal. It was the sting of being so utterly misjudged, so thoroughly underestimated. She had spent 5 years dimming her own light so William's could shine brighter, believing it was an act of love. Now she saw it for what it was, a fool's sacrifice. Her hand trembled as she reached into her small clutch for her phone. Her thumb hovered over her father's name. Alistair Blackwood. One call to him, and William Vance's world would be reduced to ash before the night was over. Her father commanded empires with a single word. He could crush William's pathetic startup ruin, Serafina's media mogul father, and erase them from the social register with the cold, quiet efficiency of a winter frost. But that felt too easy. It would be her father's victory, not hers. It would be the act of a scared little girl running to her daddy. The woman Serafina had just mocked would be replaced by the powerful daughter, but Elara herself would remain a spectator in her own life. No. She needed her family, but not as a blunt instrument of revenge. She needed them as witnesses. She needed them to stand with her as she reclaimed herself. Her thumb moved down the contact list and pressed on Liam. Liam Blackwood, her youngest brother, was the family's public face. He was a brilliant litigator, impossibly charismatic, with a smile that could charm a jury and eyes that could see straight through a lie. He was the velvet glove on the family's iron fist. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and concerned. Elara. It's past midnight in London. Is everything all right? No, Liam, it's not, she said, her voice hoarse from unshed sobs. Nothing is all right. She didn't need to explain everything. The Blackwoods communicated in the unspoken spaces between words. She just had to give him the coordinates of her pain. I'm at the Starlight Foundation Gala, at Cipriani on Wall Street. She took a shaky breath, the resolve hardening in her voice. William is here with another woman. There was a pause on the other end of the line, but it wasn't a silence of surprise. It was the silence of a predator catching a scent. I see, Liam said, his voice losing its warmth and taking on a dangerous edge. Marcus and Father are with me. We just concluded our business with the Sterling Consortium. Elara's heart gave a lurch. They were all in London, together. It was a stroke of impossible luck, or perhaps fate. Liam, she said, her voice dropping low, a mirror of his own sudden intensity. He's about to give a speech. He's trying to secure final round funding from Arthur Harrison and a few others. His whole future, everything he's built on my silence, is riding on this night. Another pause, shorter this time. She could almost hear the gears turning in his brilliant legal mind, the calculations being made. And the woman, Serafina Dubois, daughter of Robin Dubois, DMN Media. Elara supplied the name, tasting like ash in her mouth. Understood, Liam said. There was the faint sound of muffled conversation. Then his voice was back, crisp and decisive. The Blackwood jet is on the tarmac at Heathrow. We can be in New York in under 6 hours. Can you hold on for that long, Ellie? 6 hours. It felt like a lifetime. But the thought of her family crossing the Atlantic for her, of the storm that was about to break on this glittering, self-absorbed world, was a lifeline. What are you going to do? She asked, though she already knew the answer. They weren't coming for a quiet word. The Blackwoods did not do anything subtle. We are coming to pick you up, sister. Liam's voice was grimly reassuring. And to remind a few people about the consequences of breaking a contract. A marriage contract in this case. Just stay strong. Don't let them see you fall. We're on our way. He hung up. Elara stared at her phone, the screen dark. 6 hours. She pushed herself off the balustrade, her spine straightening. She walked back towards the ballroom doors, her steps no longer hesitant. She was no longer just the crying wife on the balcony. She was a ticking clock. She re-entered the ballroom and found a small, empty table in a dimly lit corner, a perfect vantage point from which to watch the proceedings. She ordered a glass of water and sipped it slowly. Her eyes fixed on William, who was now standing near the main stage, laughing with Serafina and schmoozing with potential investors. He looked confident, radiant, a man on the cusp of his own coronation. He had no idea that a transatlantic storm was gathering, and he was standing at its epicenter. The tears were gone, replaced by an icy calm. The prey had stopped running. She was now simply waiting for her pack to arrive. The next few hours unfolded in a surreal, slow-motion ballet of deceit. Elara watched from her shadowy corner as William worked the room. He was magnetic, his passion for Vance innovations infectious. He spoke of algorithms and market disruption of a future he was single-handedly building. Investors who had been on the fence men, like the stern Arthur Harrison, began to thaw, nodding along their faces, showing flickers of genuine interest. Serafina was his perfect partner in this charade. She would drift into a conversation place, a perfectly manicured hand on an investor's arm, and murmur, "William is simply a genius. Getting in on the ground floor of Vance Innovations isn't an investment. It's a legacy." She was selling them as a package deal, a power couple in the making. At one point, William's eyes found Elara in her corner. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, a silent command for her to either participate or disappear. She met his gaze without flinching, her expression unreadable. He looked away first, turning back to the warmth of his new circle. He had dismissed her. To him, she was a problem to be dealt with later. The gala's host, a local news anchor, finally took the stage. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce a man whose vision is set to reshape the future of data analytics. Please give a warm welcome to the founder and CEO of Vance Innovations, Mr. William Vance. A polite, then growing round of applause filled the hall. William strode onto the stage, beaming, waving to the crowd. He looked over at Serafina, who blew him a subtle kiss. He was at the absolute zenith of his life. "Thank you. Thank you," he began, his voice resonating with practiced confidence. "Tonight we are here to support the incredible work of the Starlight Foundation. But we are also here because we believe in the future. A future of connection, of innovation. A future powered by Vance Innovations." As he launched into his well-rehearsed pitch, Elara felt a vibration from her phone. A simple text from Liam landed. 20 minutes. A slow, genuine smile touched Elara's lips for the first time that night. The clock was about to strike midnight. And then the subtle unraveling began. It was almost imperceptible at first. A junior event coordinator scurried over to the gala's main organizer, whispering frantically in her ear. The organizer's face went pale. She began speaking into her headset, her eyes darting nervously towards the main entrance. Then Arthur Harrison, the key investor William was trying to land, discreetly pulled out his phone. His eyes widened slightly as he read a message. He looked up at William on the stage, his expression souring from interest to alarm. He tapped the shoulder of another potential investor, a man named Peterson, and showed him the phone. Peterson's jaw tightened. Within minutes, a silent, viral panic began to spread through the room's most influential players. Phones were checked, quiet, urgent conversations were had. The atmosphere in the room was shifting from celebratory to tense. William, blinded by the stage lights and his own ego, didn't notice. He was nearing his crescendo, his voice ringing with passion. And with a final round of Series B funding, which I'm thrilled to announce we are closing tonight, Vance Innovations will not just compete, it will dominate. He was met with a scattered, uncertain applause. The energy in the room had evaporated. He looked confused, his confident smile faltering for the first time. He searched the crowd, his eyes finding Serafina. She gave him a questioning shrug, her own perfectly composed face showing a crack of confusion. It was then that the main doors of Cipriani swung open. Not with a crash, but with a silent, heavy authority that seemed to suck the air out of the room. All conversation ceased. Everyone turned to look. Framed in the grand archway were 3 men. They were not dressed for a gala. They were in dark, impeccably tailored business suits that seemed to absorb the light around them. They moved not with the swagger of new money, but with the unnerving stillness of absolute power. At the front was Alistair Blackwood. His hair was silver. His face was etched with the lines of 100 boardroom battles, and his eyes, a piercing shade of Arctic blue, swept across the room, with an expression of profound disappointment, as if surveying a mess his child had made. To his right was Marcus Blackwood, the current CEO of the multi-billion-dollar Blackwood Corporation. He was tall, severe, with a face that looked as if it were carved from granite. He held a tablet in his hand, and his expression was one of cold, surgical fury. And to his left, looking utterly at home as he surveyed the chaos he was about to create, was Liam Blackwood. He caught Alara's eye across the room and gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. The pack had arrived. They began to walk forward, their footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Security guards who had clearly been given new instructions flanked them, clearing a path through the frozen crowd. The whispers started tentative at first, then spreading like wildfire. "My God, is that Alistair Blackwood? What is he doing here? He hasn't attended a public event in a decade." "That's Marcus Blackwood. They say he can bankrupt a country with a phone call." "The Blackwoods." "Here." William stood on the stage, utterly paralyzed. His speech was forgotten, his moment of triumph turned to ash. He looked at these men, then at Alara in her corner, and for the first time a sliver of terrifying comprehension dawned on his face. Serafina too was frozen, her socialite's poise shattering. She recognized these men for what they were, the real gods of this world, beings from a stratosphere so far above her own, she couldn't have imagined it. The three Blackwood men did not stop until they reached the foot of the stage, their collective gaze fixed on the man trapped in the spotlight. The king's reign was over. His executioners had arrived. The silence in the grand hall of Cipriani was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. William Vance stood on the stage, bathed in a spotlight that now felt less like a celebration and more like an interrogation lamp. He looked down at the three men who had brought his world to a screeching halt, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Liam Blackwood. Ever the master of ceremonies was the first to act. With an effortless grace, he stepped onto the stage, took the microphone from William's limp hand, and addressed the spellbound audience. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm, yet carrying to every corner of the room. It was the voice of a man accustomed to holding the complete and undivided attention of a courtroom. "Apologies for the interruption. My name is Liam Blackwood. My brother Marcus, my father Alistair, and I are here on a rather urgent family matter." He paused, letting the weight of his name settle. He then turned his gaze from the audience to William, a smile playing on his lips that held no warmth whatsoever. "Mr. Vance, a very impressive speech, full of passion, full of ambition." He then looked across the room, his eyes finding Alara. He extended a hand towards her. "But you seem to have forgotten to introduce the most important person in your life. Your wife." He waited. Every head in the room turned to follow his gaze, landing on the quiet woman in the navy dress who had been invisible all night. She rose from her chair, and with a poise she didn't know she possessed, began to walk towards the stage. The crowd parted for her, as if she were royalty. Liam's smile widened as she approached. "We're here for our sister," he announced, his voice ringing with clarity. Alara Blackwood. The name hit the room like a physical blow. A collective gasp was audible. Elara Blackwood. Not May, not some simple orphaned artist. The Blackwood, daughter of Alistair, sister to Marcus and Liam, an heiress to one of the most powerful and fiercely private family fortunes on the planet. William's face drained of all colour. It was the look of a man watching his own ghost rise from the grave. He stumbled back a step, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Seraphina's reaction was even more dramatic. The smug, confident mask she wore cracked and fell away, revealing a face contorted with shock and raw panic. The Cartier necklace suddenly seemed cheap and gaudy. She had mocked Blackwood. She was called a Blackwood beige. The gravity of her miscalculation was so immense, it was comical. Elara reached the stage. Liam took her hand, helping her up the final step. She stood beside him, no longer a wilting flower, but a woman flanked by titans. She looked at William, her eyes clear and cold. There was no hatred in them, only a profound and final pity. Then Marcus stepped forward. He never bothered to climb the stage. He didn't need to. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, and utterly devastating. He looked up at William, tapping the screen of the tablet in his hand. "William Vance." Marcus began, his tone that of a CEO delivering a terminal quarterly report. "As of 10 minutes ago, your primary investor, the Sterling Hayes Fund, was acquired in a hostile takeover by a subsidiary of the Blackwood Corporation. Their first executive action was to call in their investment in Vance Innovations effective immediately." William swayed on his feet. "No. You can't. I can." Marcus continued, his voice cutting through William's pathetic protest. "Furthermore, the second lien debt you took on to stay afloat last quarter. We bought that this morning, all of it. The bank that holds your business and personal credit lines. My father has been on their board for 30 years. As of this moment, your company is insolvent. Your assets are frozen, and every line of credit you have has been revoked." He looked from William to the pale-faced Arthur Harrison in the audience. "For those of you considering investing in this venture," Marcus said, his lip curling in distaste, "I would advise a thorough re-evaluation. The Blackwood Corporation does not invest in failures, and we are very protective of our assets." The message was clear. Vance Innovations was not just dead. It was radioactive. The investors, including Mr. Harrison, began backing away physically, creating distance between themselves and William, as if he were carrying a plague. Finally, Alistair Blackwood, who had remained silent until now, took a step forward. He was not loud like Liam or cold like Marcus. His power was in his stillness, in the immense, crushing weight of his presence. He looked only at his daughter. "Elara," he said, his voice filled with a quiet paternal sorrow. "Are you ready to come home?" Elara looked at the ruins of her husband on the stage, at the terrified face of his mistress in the crowd. She looked at the wreckage of the life she had tried to build, and she felt nothing, just a profound sense of release. She nodded at her father. "Yes, Papa, I am." Alistair then lifted his gaze to William for the first and only time. He didn't need to say a word. The look in his eyes contained entire volumes of contempt and condemnation. In that single glance, William Vance was not just bankrupted, he was erased. He was reduced from a promising tech CEO to a footnote in the story of a Blackwood's wrath. Liam put a protective arm around Elara's shoulders. "I believe we're done here," he said into the microphone, before letting it drop to the stage with a resounding thud that echoed the final nail being hammered into William Vance's coffin. As the Blackwood family turned to leave, a cordon of their private security materialized, forming a seamless, impenetrable barrier around them. They moved through the stunned crowd with the calm deliberation of a royal procession departing a disaster zone. No one dared to speak to them. No one dared to meet their eyes. They were a force of nature that had just swept through, and the gala's attendees were merely mortals surveying the wreckage. William remained on the stage, a pathetic statue in the harsh glare of the spotlight. The life he had so carefully constructed, the future he had been so certain of, had been dismantled piece by piece in less than 5 minutes. He was a king who had woken up to find his kingdom, his castle, and even the clothes on his back had been nothing more than a dream. He finally collapsed, not onto a chair, but onto the stage floor itself, burying his head in his hands, as dry, racking sobs of pure désir shook his body. Meanwhile, Serafina was experiencing her own, more social demolition. As the initial shock wore off, the attendees, especially the women she considered her rivals, began to look at her with a mixture of pity and unconcealed glee. Her currency in this world was perception, the perception of power of being on the winning team. She had hitched her wagon to William, believing him to be a rising star, and in doing so had publicly and viciously insulted a woman who turned out to be the sun itself. She tried to salvage the situation. She spotted Auden Sterling, the wife of a rival media CEO, and tried to approach her with a shaky smile. "Can you believe this drama, Auden? It's just ghastly." Auden Sterling, a woman who knew which way the wind blew, simply looked at Serafina's Cartier necklace, then at her face, and gave her a smile that was pure acid. "Ghastly. I think it's the most riveting piece of theatre I've seen all year. You were wonderfully cast as the court jester, Serafina." She then turned her back, a gesture of social execution so final that others nearby physically shied away from Serafina as if she were contagious. Her father, Robin Dubois, would hear of this by morning. His daughter had not just made a fool of herself. She had made a powerful, implacable enemy in the Blackwoods. The fallout for his own media empire could be catastrophic. In her desperate social climbing, Serafina had inadvertently started a war she could not possibly win. Her phone began to buzz with messages, but she didn't need to look. She knew they were from her furious father. Her charmed life was over. As Elara walked towards the grand exit, flanked by her father and brothers, she felt a profound sense of dislocation. The opulent ballroom, which had seemed so intimidating just hours before, now looked small and tawdry. The powerful people she had been so afraid of now seemed like frightened children. She hadn't realized the scale of the world she had been born into, the power she had so casually set aside for a quiet life that turned out to be a lie. Just before they reached the doors, she stopped and looked back one last time. She saw William, a broken man, being helped off the stage by a bewildered event staffer. She saw Serafina standing alone in her crimson dress, a pariah in the world she had tried so desperately to conquer. There was no triumph in Elara's heart, no taste of sweet revenge. There was only a vast, aching sadness for the woman she had been, the trusting, hopeful artist who had believed in a simple love. That woman had died on the balcony tonight. But as her father gently placed his hand on her shoulder, guiding her out into the cool New York night, where a fleet of black cars waited, she knew that in her place someone new was being born. Someone stronger. Someone who would never forget the name she carried. Outside, the air was clean and cold. Liam opened the door to the lead car, a custom Rolls-Royce Phantom. "Where to, Ellie?" he asked gently. She looked at the glittering skyline of the city, a city that now felt like it belonged to her again. "Home," she said, her voice clear and steady. The Blackwood Tower. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. She was no longer hiding in a Brooklyn brownstone. She was Elara Blackwood, and she was going home. The life of Mrs. Vance was over. The real work, the work of rebuilding herself, was just beginning. The weeks that followed the Starlight Gala were a quiet storm of legal and financial maneuvering, orchestrated with brutal efficiency by Marcus and Liam. William Vance ceased to exist in any meaningful public way. His company was absorbed by a Blackwood subsidiary, its valuable assets stripped and repurposed, its name erased from the industry. He was forced into personal bankruptcy. The Brooklyn brownstone was sold to cover a fraction of his debts, and rumors swirled that he was last seen working a menial logistics job in a warehouse in New Jersey, a ghost haunted by the life he'd almost had. Seraphina Dubois fared no better. Her father, in a desperate act of damage control, sent her on an indefinite wellness retreat to a secluded facility in Switzerland. Her social media went dark, her name was scrubbed from event lists, and the vibrant, cruel socialite became a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. She had flown too close to the sun and had been incinerated by its fire. But Elara was not interested in their fates. She had no time to spare for the ghosts of her past. She was too busy rediscovering herself. Living in the penthouse of the Blackwood Tower, a sky-high sanctuary of glass and steel overlooking a central park, she felt the fog that had clouded her life for 5 years begin to lift. In the beginning, her father and brothers were fiercely protective, treating her as if she were a fragile piece of porcelain that had been shattered. But they quickly realized she wasn't broken, just dormant. One morning, Alistair entered her private studio, a vast, light-filled space she hadn't used since her art school days. He found her, not with watercolors, but with massive canvases, her hands and clothes smeared with thick, vibrant oil paints. The gentle landscapes were gone. In their place were bold, abstract expressions of fury, sorrow, and ultimately a fierce, defiant joy. The colors were loud, the brushstrokes were aggressive. It was the work of a woman who was finally allowing herself to take up space. "This is powerful, Elara," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion, as he looked at a canvas dominated by a slash of crimson against a backdrop of deep, stormy blues. "I spent 5 years painting in pastels to keep the peace," she replied, not taking her eyes off her work. "I'm done with pastels." With the full backing of the Blackwood Foundation, she began planning her first solo exhibition. She didn't want a soft launch in a small, polite gallery. She wanted to make a statement. Liam secured the entire ground floor of the MoMA for a one-night-only event. The art world was abuzz. Who was this Elara Blackwood, this unknown artist with the backing of one of the world's most powerful families? The night of the exhibition was a coronation. The space was filled not with the socialites and hollow investors of the Starlight Gala, but with serious art critics, collectors, and fellow artists. Elara, dressed in a striking architectural gown of deep indigo, moved through the room with a quiet confidence that was more commanding than Seraphina's loud bravado had ever been. She was not Mrs. Vance, the supportive wife. She was not Elara Blackwood, the reclusive heiress. She was simply Elara the artist. Her work was a critical sensation. The New York Times Review, published the next morning, called her a vital, explosive new voice, her work a testament to the ferocious power of rebirth. Every single piece sold before the night was over, with the proceeds going to a charity she had established to support female artists struggling to make their mark. Late that night, after the last guest had departed, Elara stood alone in the center of the gallery, surrounded by her work. Her brother Liam came to stand beside her. "You did it, Ellie," he said softly. "You built something real from the rubble." "They thought my name was my power," she said, looking at the bold signature, Elara, on her favorite piece. "They never understood. The name just opens doors. It's what you do when you walk through them that matters." She had walked through a door of pain and humiliation, and had emerged into a gallery filled with light color and her own undeniable strength. The story of the crying wife at the gala would fade into gossip, but the story of Elara the artist was just beginning. She had finally learned the lesson her father had tried to teach her all those years ago. She had remembered who she was, and she would never let anyone else name her again. 6 months after the MoMA exhibition, the name Elara Blackwood was synonymous with artistic fire. Her work was the talk of the art world. Her story, a modern myth whispered from Manhattan to Monaco. She had, by all accounts, won. The ashes of her old life had given rise to a phoenix, vibrant and soaring. Yet as she sat sketching on a bench in the conservatory garden of Central Park, she felt the familiar weight of a its bars not made of steel, but of solid gold. Her anonymity was gone, a casualty of her spectacular vindication. In her previous life as Elara Vance, she could sit for hours observing the delicate play of light on a flower petal invisible to the world. Now she was a landmark. Tourists would lower their voices as they passed their phone cameras, angled discreetly in her direction. "That's her," they'd murmur, "the artist, the Blackwood." The two titles had become inseparable, fused together by the heat of that night at the gala. She had wanted her work to speak for itself, but it was always introduced by the echo of her family's power. She was no longer William's forgotten wife, but she feared she was becoming something else, her family's most interesting asset. The feeling crystallized during a meeting at the prestigious Guggenheim Foundation. They had invited her to join their acquisitions board, an honor she had once dreamed of. She had arrived prepared with pages of notes on emerging artists, whose work she admired, artists who were bold and unconventional. But the meeting wasn't about art. "Elara, your presence on this board is a game changer." The chairman, a portly man named Mr. Davenport, had boomed his smile obsequious. "With the Blackwood name attached to our spring fundraiser, we can finally secure the Rothko wing." Another board member chimed in. "Exactly. Your brother Marcus's corporation has interests in tech. Perhaps you could persuade him that a digital art initiative would be a worthy investment." Elara sat in stunned silence, her carefully prepared notes feeling foolishly naive in her hands. They didn't want her eye. They wanted her name. They didn't want her vision. They wanted her connections. She was a key, not a connoisseur. The power she had called upon to save herself now cast a gilded shadow over everything she touched, threatening to eclipse the very talent she had fought so hard to reclaim. Was this all her victory had earned her? A promotion from a man's accessory to a family's emblem? The beige watercolor was now a brand logo. That evening, she found her brother Marcus in the penthouse library, a cavernous room of dark wood and the scent of old leather. He was reviewing financial reports on a glowing tablet, the numbers reflecting the cold, hard logic with which he governed their empire. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He looked up, his expression neutral. "Is everything all right?" That night at the gala, she began choosing her words with care. "I will always be grateful. You, Liam, and Papa. You saved me. We protected our own." he stated, as if it were a simple law of physics. It is what we do. But the way you did it, she pressed on, pacing in front of the towering fireplace. The demolition. You didn't just end my marriage. You annihilated a man's entire existence. You used a weapon of mass destruction to solve a domestic dispute. Marcus set his tablet down, giving her his full, unnerving attention. He humiliated a Blackwood. In public. He was building his company on your emotional and financial support while planning to discard you. It was not a domestic dispute. It was an attack on this family. We responded in proportion to the insult, not the man. But don't you see the consequences for me? She asked, her voice rising with a passion that surprised them both. You didn't just show them our power. You branded me with it. When people look at me now, they don't see an artist. They see the woman whose family can ruin lives with a phone call. My success feels tainted. Did the Times critic truly love my work? Or was he just afraid to offend Alistair Blackwood's daughter? Did the collectors buy my paintings? Or were they just buying proximity to power? Her voice broke slightly on the last question. You saved me from William, but did you ever stop to think that you might be trapping me in something else? This name, it feels heavier than it ever has before. Marcus was silent for a long moment, his gaze analytical, as if he were studying a complex variable in an equation. I see, he said finally. His voice was not unkind, but it was devoid of sentiment. You are confusing the tool with the outcome. Our name, our power. It is a tool. Nothing more. It can be a shield, as it was for you that night. Or it can be a battering ram. That it can also be a spotlight is merely a side effect. The world Ilara is not a gallery where things are judged on pure merit. It is a battlefield. You were wounded, and we eliminated the threat. He stood and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city lights. You ask if there was another way. Perhaps. A quiet divorce. A settlement. And you would have been known forever as the poor, tragic artist who was publicly cheated on. He would have succeeded on his own with his new wife, and you would have been a footnote. We gave you a different story, a story of strength, not victimhood. Yes, the name is a part of that story now. It is your birthright. To resent it is to resent the very shield that keeps you safe. He turned back to her. The question is not what the name does to you, Ilara. The question is what you will do with the name. His words cold and pragmatic, as they were struck a chord deep within her. He was right. She had been so focused on the shadow her name cast that she had forgotten she was the one controlling the light. She could remain a passive emblem, a tool for others to use, or she could wield her influence with the same intention and precision as a brush stroke on a canvas. The following week, Ilara returned to the Guggenheim boardroom. She accepted the position. Mr. Davenport began to clap enthusiastically, but she held up a hand, silencing him. I am accepting this position as an artist, not as a fundraiser, she stated, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. My focus will be on the art, and only the art. And my first proposal is this. The Blackwood Foundation will endow a new biannual prize. The Emergence Prize. It will be the single largest grant for an undiscovered artist in the world. A murmur of excitement went through the room. However, she continued, her eyes meeting those of every person at the table, it will have one non-negotiable condition. The judging will be completely blind. The selection committee will see only the art with no names, no biographies, no gallery representation attached. Merit and merit alone. I want to find artists who have no powerful family to open doors for them. I want to find the talent that is screaming to be heard from the quietest rooms." The room was silent. She had taken their avarice and transformed it into an act of pure artistic integrity. She was not rejecting her power. She was refining it. She was using the sledgehammer to crack open a door for someone else. At that moment, she finally understood. Her name was not a shadow or a brand. It was a responsibility. William and Serafina had seen power as a weapon for personal gain. Her family saw it as a shield for self-preservation. She would make it a lantern to illuminate the paths of those who, like the woman she once was, were still trying to find their way out of the dark. She was Elara Blackwood, the artist, and she was finally ready to paint her own masterpiece, not on canvas, but on the world itself. In the end, this wasn't just a story about revenge. It was a story about identity. Elara's greatest victory wasn't the downfall of her tormentors, but the rediscovery of her own voice. She had to lose the name Vance to truly become Elara. So often in life, we allow ourselves to be defined by our relationships, our jobs, or the quiet sacrifices we make, dimming our own light for the comfort of others. But true power lies dormant within us, waiting for a reason to awaken. Elara's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to build a foundation strong enough to hold up the masterpiece you were always meant to be. If this story of resilience and vindication resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of reclaiming your own narrative, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and empower. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.